Good morning. A new day dawns. There's nothing more former than a former leader, and it's why I admire people who've had the great privilege of leading their countries who step back and only make the occasional foray back into the public square. George W. Bush, as President of the United States, ultimately failed. Decent man. He's done a lot of terrific work in his post-presidential years. Julia Gillard, one of our prime ministers, not a successful one. I think that she got there too early, but has stepped back and done good work outside of um, the prime ministership. Boris Johnson should get that message. Boris has a lot to say about everything, and for a man who failed so miserably as prime minister, it just strikes me as sometimes these people need a little self-awareness, just to quietly remove themselves from public life. But Boris was at it again at the weekend. He wrote a lengthy article that I have here from the Wall Street Journal and popped up again on British TV at the weekend. And he was suggesting that Britain needs to get more involved and Europe needs to get more involved in the war between Russia and Ukraine. I could think back to not long after Russia invaded, which was February 24, 2022. Boris Johnson, then former Prime Minister of England, said that Putin couldn't be allowed to have 1 inch, not 1 inch, he repeated, of Ukraine. Well, of course, Putin was always going to get more than 1 inch, and he was going to keep more than 1 inch. The issue before these hundreds of thousands of lost lives and life-changing injuries was going to be how much he got to take and how much he got to keep. That was a question several years ago, and it's a question now. Of course, Putin was in the wrong, but saying that is not going to turn things around. Somehow this thing needs to be resolved. But Boris wants to put troops into Ukraine, not only where they're going to actually get hurt, but he wants to make this symbolic statement. What it will mean, I've got no idea. Let me read you just a paragraph or two. Johnson says, right now, Europe has a golden opportunity to assert its strategic independence. But he then makes the point they need to do it with Europe. So how is that independent? Anyway, he says, if Europeans want the chance to seize leadership from the US and do things differently, then this is it. Can anybody with 2020, or not even 2020, look at Europe today and the United States today, the greatest military force in the history of the world, and say that Europe is in a position to do what he is suggesting? Anyway, he goes on to say, their mission wouldn't be to fight. This is the force he wants to put on the ground, or to put European lives at risk. No, he doesn't want to do that. He wants the war to continue, so Ukrainian lives are still going to be lost every single day, but he wants to make this symbolic statement. The wonderful writer J.K. Rowling once said of Boris Johnson that you could replace him as Prime Minister with 3 ferrets in a sack, and the only significant change would be one for more gravitas and significance. Harsh, but probably true. Boris wakes up every morning, looks in the mirror and sees Winston Churchill, which is a little bit like, Anthony Albanese looking in the mirror and seeing Bob Hawke or Paul Keating. Sometimes you just got to face reality. But Boris had some further advice for Europe. He said, if I can just find it, and if I'm going to quote him, I like to get him right. He says, European leaders need to be serious. They need to show that they mean it, that they are willing to do something big, risky, and strategically autonomous to help Ukraine, which they show no sign of doing, or else they need to put a sock in it. So Boris will sit back on his country estate drinking champagne, is urging troops on the ground and for this dreadful war to go on and on. He says Europe needs to do something about it or put a sock in it. Putting a sock in it. It's sound advice. Boris should take it. Have a great day.